Maria Santos stood outside the tall glass doors of Steinway Concert Hall. Her hands were shaking, but not from the cold October wind. Inside her old canvas bag was her violin. It was not a pretty violin. The wood was scratched, and one of the strings was not the right color. She had bought it from a pawn shop 3 years ago for $200. That was a lot of money for her then. It was still a lot of money for her now. She looked at her reflection in the glass doors. Her black hair was pulled back tight. She wore her only good dress. It was navy blue and came from a thrift store. The shoes on her feet were also from the thrift store. They were black and had small scuffs on the toes. She had tried to polish them, but the marks would not go away. Maria worked at City General Hospital. She cleaned floors and emptied trash cans. She worked the night shift from 11 at night until 7 in the morning. Then she would go home, to her small apartment. She would sleep for a few hours. In the afternoon, she would practice her violin. She did not have a teacher. She could not pay for lessons. Instead, she watched videos on her old laptop. The screen had a crack in the corner, but she could still see the violin teacher showing her how to hold the bow. Her apartment was small. It had 1 bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a living room that was also her practice space. The walls were thin. Mrs. Chen next door would sometimes knock when Maria played too loud, but Mrs. Chen was kind. She would also knock to tell Maria when her playing sounded beautiful. The audition letter was in her bag next to her violin. Maria had read it so many times that the paper was soft from her fingers. The letter said she could try out for 3rd chair violin in the community orchestra. 3rd chair was not 1st chair. It was not even 2nd chair, but it was still a chair in a real orchestra. Maria had dreamed of this for years. She thought about her father. His name was Roberto, and he had died 2 years ago. Roberto had loved music. He could not read music, but he could sing any song after hearing it once. When Maria was little, he would sing to her in Spanish. His voice was deep and warm. He worked in construction during the day. At night, he would come home tired and dusty, but he would still sing while Maria's mother cooked dinner. Roberto had wanted to buy Maria a piano when she was 8 years old. They had gone to a music store together. Maria remembered the way the pianos looked. They were shiny and black. When she pressed the keys, beautiful sounds came out. But pianos cost too much money. Roberto's face had looked sad when the man at the store told him the price. They left the store with nothing. That was why Maria chose the violin. Violins were smaller than pianos. They cost less money. She could carry a violin anywhere. When she finally had enough money for the violin from the pawn shop, she thought about her father. She wished he could see her now. Maria pulled open the heavy glass door. The lobby of the concert hall was huge. The ceiling was very high. There were large windows that let in bright sunlight. The floor was made of marble. Her shoes made small clicking sounds as she walked. She felt very small in this big space. A woman sat behind a desk near the entrance. She wore a black suit and had blonde hair. Her name tag said, Rebecca. Rebecca looked up when Maria approached. "I am here for the violin audition," Maria said. Her voice sounded quiet in the big lobby. Rebecca looked at a list on her computer. Name: Maria Santos. Rebecca typed something. "You are number 12. The auditions are in rehearsal room B. Take the elevator to the 3rd floor. Turn left when you get out. Room B will be on your right." "Thank you," Maria said. The elevator was also very fancy. The walls inside were mirrors. Maria could see herself from every angle. She looked nervous. Her dress seemed more faded in the bright elevator lights. The violin case in her hands looked old and beat up next to all the shiny mirrors. The elevator door opened on the 3rd floor. Maria walked down a long hallway. The walls were covered with pictures of famous musicians. She recognized some of them from her library books. There was a picture of a woman holding a violin. The woman wore a beautiful white dress and held an expensive-looking violin. Maria wondered if she would ever look like that. She found room B and stopped outside the door. She could hear violin music coming from inside. Someone was playing something, fast and difficult. The music was perfect. Every note was clear and strong. Maria listened and felt her heart sink. How could she play after someone who sounded like that? The music stopped. Maria heard voices talking quietly. Then the door opened. A young man walked out. He carried a violin case that looked new and expensive. He wore a black suit and tie. His shoes were shiny and had no scuffs. He looked confident, like he belonged in this fancy building. "Good luck," he said to Maria as he walked past. But his voice did not sound like he meant it. Maria looked into the room. She could see 3 people sitting at a long table. They were the judges for the audition. One was an older man with gray hair and glasses. He wore a dark suit and looked serious. The other 2 were younger. One was a woman with red hair. The other was a man with a beard. They all had papers and pencils in front of them. "Next," called the older man without looking up. Maria walked into the room. Her legs felt weak. The room was smaller than the lobby but still bigger than her apartment. There was a piano in one corner. Music stands were lined up against the wall. The table where the judges sat was at the front of the room. "Your name?" asked the older man. He still did not look at her. "Maria Santos." The woman with red hair wrote something on her paper. The man with the beard looked at his watch. "You may begin when ready," said the older man. Maria opened her violin case. Her hands were shaking more now. She took out her violin and her bow. The violin looked even more scratched under the bright lights of the rehearsal room. She could see the judges looking at it. Their faces did not show what they were thinking. She put the violin under her chin. The position felt natural now. She had practiced this thousands of times in her small apartment. She closed her eyes and tried to remember why she was here. This was her dream. This was what her father would have wanted for her. Maria was ready to play. The older man with gray hair looked at his expensive gold watch again. His name was Dr. Heinrich Wolf. He was the conductor of the city's main orchestra. People said he was very important in the music world. He had worked with famous musicians in big cities like New York and Boston. Maria had read about him in the newspaper once. Dr. Wolf did not look happy. He had been sitting in this room for 3 hours. 12 people had already played for him. Most of them were good. Some were very good. But none of them had made him excited. He wanted to go home. His wife was making his favorite dinner tonight. The woman with red hair was named Sarah Chen. She played first violin in the community orchestra. Sarah had been playing violin since she was 4 years old. Her parents had paid for expensive lessons. She had gone to a music school where all the students were very talented. Sarah looked at Maria's old violin and felt sorry for her. She knew that cheap violins did not sound good. She wondered why Maria had even come to the audition. The man with the beard was called Tom Rodriguez. He taught music at the local high school. Tom had seen many students over the years. He could usually tell who would be good and who would not just by looking at them. When he saw Maria's nervous face and old violin, he thought this audition would be over quickly. Dr. Wolf reached into his folder and pulled out a sheet of music. It was a very simple piece. The title at the top said D major scale exercise. It was the kind of music that beginning students practiced. The notes went up and down in a basic pattern. Any student who had played violin for 6 months could play it. "Just play this," Dr. Wolf said. He slid the paper across the table toward Maria. He did not get up from his chair. "It is a simple scale in D major, nothing difficult." Maria walked over to the table to get the paper. She could feel all 3 judges watching her. Her hands were still shaking a little. She picked up the music and looked at it. The notes on the page were easy to read. She had practiced scales like this many times in her apartment. Dr. Wolf looked at his watch again. "We are running late," he said to the other judges. "I have dinner plans at 7. Sarah Chen started putting her papers into her folder. She was ready to leave too. Tom Rodriguez was writing notes about the previous audition. He had already decided that Maria would not make the orchestra. Her violin looked too cheap and she seemed too nervous. Maria walked back to the center of the room. She held the music in one hand and her violin in the other. The paper was simple, but something felt wrong to her. This music had no soul. It had no feeling. It was just notes going up and down. Her father had always told her that music without feeling was not really music at all. She looked at the three judges again. Dr. Wolf was checking his phone. Sarah was closing her folder. Tom was looking out the window. None of them were really paying attention to her. They had already decided she was not important. Maria thought about her father again. She remembered the songs he used to sing. They were not simple scales. They were full of love and sadness and hope. They told stories about their family and their dreams. Roberto had never learned to read music, but his songs had more feeling than any piece of paper. She also thought about her mother, Elena. Elena worked at a hotel cleaning rooms. She left the house every morning at 6. She came home at night, tired and sore, but she always asked Maria about her violin practice. Elena would sit in their small living room and listen to Maria play. Even when the music was not perfect, Elena would smile and clap her hands. "We do not have all day," Dr. Wolf said without looking up from his phone. Maria looked down at the paper in her hand. The scale exercise looked boring and lifeless. She thought about all the hours she had spent learning to play violin. She had watched hundreds of videos. She had read library books about music. She had practiced until her fingers hurt. She had done all of this because she loved music. But this simple scale was not the kind of music she loved. The room was very quiet. Maria could hear the air conditioning humming. She could hear cars driving past the building outside. She could hear her own heartbeat. The three judges were waiting for her to start playing, but they were not really waiting. They just wanted her to finish so they could go home. Maria closed her eyes for a moment. She thought about why she was really here. It was not just to get a job in the orchestra. It was not just to make money. She was here because music was the most important thing in her life. Music connected her to her father. Music helped her feel less alone. Music was how she expressed all the feelings that were too big for words. When she opened her eyes, she made a decision. She folded the paper with the scale exercise and put it on a nearby music stand. She would not play the simple scale. She would play something else. Something that came from her heart. Dr. Wolf finally looked up. "What are you doing?" "The music is right there." Maria looked at him directly for the first time. "I would like to play something different," she said. Her voice was stronger now. "This is not how auditions work," Sarah Chen said. She looked annoyed. "You play what we give you to play." "The scale exercise will be fine," Tom Rodriguez added. He wanted to finish and go home to his family, but Maria had already made up her mind. She lifted her violin and put it under her chin. She held her bow in her right hand. She could feel the three judges staring at her. They looked confused and a little angry. This was not what they had expected. "I will play something I know," Maria said quietly. Dr. Wolf started to say something, but Maria had already begun to play. The first note came out clear and strong. It was not the first note of the D major scale. It was something completely different. Something beautiful and sad and hopeful all at the same time. The three judges stopped what they were doing. Dr. Wolf put down his phone. Sarah Chen stopped closing her folder. Tom Rodriguez turned away from the window. They all looked at Maria with surprise. This was not what was supposed to happen in a simple audition for third chair violin. But Maria was no longer thinking about the judges. She was no longer thinking about the audition or the orchestra or anything else. She was thinking about her father's voice and her mother's tired hands and all the dreams that had brought her to this moment. The music that came from her violin was not written on any piece of paper. It came from somewhere much deeper than that. The first note that came from Maria's violin was unlike anything the judges had heard all day. It was soft but clear, like a voice calling across a great distance. The note held in the air for several seconds before Maria moved to the next one. Then the next. Each note seemed to grow from the one before it, like flowers blooming in slow motion. Dr. Wolf's hand stopped halfway to his phone. He had been about to check another message from his wife about dinner. But something in that first note made him freeze. In his 30 years of conducting orchestras, he had heard thousands of violinists. Most played the notes correctly, some played them beautifully, but very few played with the kind of raw emotion he was hearing now. Sarah Chen felt her breath catch in her throat. She had been ready to pack up and leave. She had already written no on her evaluation sheet next to Maria's name, but now she could not move. The music coming from Maria's cheap violin was filling the room with something she could not name. It was not just sound. It was feeling made into music. Tom Rodriguez turned completely away from the window. He had been watching cars in the parking lot, thinking about what he would have for dinner. Now he was staring at Maria with wide eyes. In all his years of teaching high school students, he had never heard a student play with this kind of natural ability. This was not something that could be taught in lessons. This was pure talent. Maria kept her eyes closed as she played. The melody that flowed from her violin was not written down anywhere. It came from memories buried deep in her heart. She was playing the lullaby her grandmother used to sing when Maria was very small, but she was also playing something new, something that told the story of her life. The melody started simple and sweet, like a child's song. But as Maria continued, it grew more complex. The notes began to dance around each other in patterns that seemed impossible on such an old violin. Her left hand moved up and down the neck of the instrument with perfect precision. Her right hand drew the bow across the strings with just the right pressure to make each note sing. Dr. Wolf found himself leaning forward in his chair. This was not possible. The violin Maria was holding looked like it came from a garage sale. The strings were mismatched. The wood was scratched and dull. But somehow she was making it sound like a violin worth thousands of dollars. The tone was rich and warm. Every note was perfectly in tune. The melody began to change again. Now it sounded like something from Maria's childhood church. She was remembering Sunday mornings when her family would sit in wooden pews and listen to the choir. The hymns had been in Spanish, and the voices of the congregation had risen together in harmony. Maria's violin began to capture that feeling of many voices singing as one. But even as she played the church music, she added something else. The rhythm began to change. It became the rhythm of her mother's sewing machine. Elena would work late, into the night, making alterations to clothes for extra money. The machine would go fast, then slow, then fast again. Maria had fallen asleep many nights to that sound. Now it was part of her music. Sarah Chen felt tears forming in her eyes. She did not understand why. She was a professional musician. She did not usually get emotional during auditions, but there was something about Maria's playing that reached straight into her heart. The music seemed to tell a story about struggle and hope and love. It was the story of someone who had faced hard times but had never given up. The melody grew stronger now. Maria's bow moved faster across the strings. Her fingers flew up and down the neck of the violin. The music filled every corner of the rehearsal room. It seemed to bounce off the walls and come back even more beautiful than before. The cheap violin was singing like it had found its voice for the first time. Tom Rodriguez realized he was holding his breath. He had never heard anything like this. Maria was not just playing notes. She was telling a story without words. He could hear sadness in some passages, but also joy. He could hear the sound of someone who had worked hard for everything in their life. Someone who understood both struggle and beauty. Dr. Wolf looked at Maria's face as she played. Her eyes were still closed, but her expression showed complete concentration. This was not someone trying to impress judges. This was someone sharing their soul through music. He had seen many talented musicians over the years, but most of them played to show off their skill. Maria was playing to express something much deeper. The music began to build toward something bigger. Maria's whole body swayed with the melody. Her cheap violin seemed to glow under the rehearsal room lights. The sounds coming from it were so rich and complex that it was hard to believe only one instrument was playing. Sometimes it sounded like a whole section of violins. Sometimes it sounded like a human voice singing. The melody told the story of a family leaving everything behind to come to a new country. It told about a father who worked with his hands to build a better life for his children. It told about a mother who cleaned other people's houses so her daughter could have opportunities she never had. It told about a young woman who bought a violin from a pawn shop and taught herself to play by watching videos on a cracked computer screen. But the music was not just about sadness or struggle. There were passages that sparkled with hope and joy. There were moments that sounded like celebration. Maria was also playing about dreams coming true, about the magic that happens when someone refuses to give up on what they love most. The three judges sat completely still. None of them moved. None of them checked their phones or looked at their watches. They were all under the spell of Maria's music. This was not what they had expected when they came to work today. They had thought they would listen to some simple scales and pick someone to fill a chair in the back of the orchestra. They had not expected to witness something extraordinary. As Maria continued to play, the melody began to soar. Her violin sang notes that seemed to touch the ceiling of the room. The music was no longer just about the past. It was about the future. It was about possibility. It was about what could happen when talent meets opportunity. It was about dreams that refuse to die, no matter how difficult life becomes. The cheap violin in Maria's hands had become something magical. Under her touch, it was no longer just wood and strings. It had become a voice that could speak directly to the human heart. The scratches on its surface did not matter. The mismatched strings did not matter. What mattered was the soul of the person playing it. Dr. Wolf, Sarah Chen, and Tom Rodriguez all knew they were hearing something special. This was not just a good audition. This was not even just a great audition. This was the kind of music that changes people's lives. The kind of performance that reminds you why music exists in the first place. And Maria played on, lost in her own world of melody and memory, not knowing that she had already transformed everything. As Maria continued to play, something incredible began to happen in the rehearsal room. The music she was creating was no longer just a simple melody. It had grown into something much more complex and beautiful. Her fingers moved across the strings, with speed and accuracy that seemed impossible for someone who had never taken formal lessons. The bow in her right hand danced across the strings like it was alive. The melody she played now had layers. There were high notes that sparkled like stars. There were low notes that rumbled like distant thunder. There were middle notes that sang like human voices. Somehow Maria was making her single violin sound like an entire orchestra. Dr. Wolf had heard professional musicians struggle to create such rich, full sounds with much more expensive instruments. Maria's face showed complete concentration, but also peace. Her eyes remained closed, but her expression was calm and focused. She was no longer the nervous woman who had walked into the room 20 minutes ago. The music had transformed her into something else. She looked like she belonged on the stage of the world's greatest concert halls. Dr. Wolf found himself thinking about the first time he had heard truly great music. He was 8 years old and his parents had taken him to hear a famous violinist perform. That night had changed his life. It had made him decide to dedicate his life to music. Now 30 years later, he was feeling that same sense of wonder. This cleaning woman with a pawnshop violin was creating the same magic that had inspired him as a child. Sarah Chen was no longer thinking about going home. She was no longer thinking about anything except the music. As a professional violinist herself, she understood how difficult what Maria was doing really was. The techniques Maria was using were advanced. The musicality was sophisticated. But more than that, there was an emotional depth that could not be taught. This was the kind of playing that came from life experience, from real joy and real pain. The melody continued to evolve. Now it sounded like a conversation between different voices. Sometimes Maria played fast, complicated passages that showed incredible technical skill. Other times she played simple, beautiful phrases that went straight to the heart. She seemed to understand exactly when to show off her ability and when to focus on pure emotion. Tom Rodriguez was amazed by what he was hearing. He taught teenage students every day. He knew how hard it was to develop this level of skill. Most of his best students had been playing since they were very young. They had expensive instruments and private teachers. They practiced for hours every day. But even his most talented students could not play with the natural musicality he was hearing from Maria. The music began to tell specific stories now. Maria played a passage that sounded like children laughing and playing in a park. Then she played something that sounded like an old man telling stories by a fireplace. She played music that sounded like rain on a roof, like wind in trees, like waves crashing on a beach. Her violin had become a tool for painting pictures with sound. Dr. Wolf realized that Maria was composing as she played. This was not a piece she had memorized from a book or video. She was creating it in real time, pulling melodies from her imagination and her memories. This was improvisation at the highest level. Many professional musicians could not do what she was doing right now. The room itself seemed to be responding to Maria's music. The acoustic properties of the rehearsal space made her violin sound even richer and more beautiful. Every note hung in the air for exactly the right amount of time before fading away. The silence between notes was as important as the notes themselves. Maria understood this instinctively. Sarah Chen noticed that her own breathing had synchronized with Maria's playing. During the slow, peaceful passages, she breathed deeply and slowly. During the fast, exciting sections, her heart beat faster. This was what great music was supposed to do. It was supposed to connect with the listener's body and soul, not just their ears. Maria played a section that sounded like a celebration. The notes danced and sparkled with joy. It was the sound of festivals and weddings and birthday parties. But then the music shifted, becoming more serious and thoughtful. Now it sounded like prayers and meditation and quiet moments alone. Maria was showing that she understood all the different emotions that music could express. Tom Rodriguez found himself thinking about his own students. He would play this recording for them if he had one. This was what they should aspire to. Not just technical perfection, but emotional truth. Maria was showing them that music was not about playing the right notes in the right order. It was about sharing your humanity with others. The melody soared higher now. Maria's violin sang notes that seemed to reach impossible heights. But even as she displayed her technical abilities, she never lost sight of the emotion. Each high note was placed exactly where it needed to be to tell the story she was creating. There were no wasted notes, no showing off for its own sake. Dr. Wolf looked around the room and realized that everything had changed. When Maria had started playing, this had been just another audition room. Now it felt like a sacred space. The music had transformed not just Maria, but the entire environment. Even the afternoon light coming through the windows seemed different, softer and warmer. As Maria continued her performance, the judges began to understand that they were witnessing something rare. This was not just talent. This was genius. Raw, untrained genius that had developed despite obstacles, not because of advantages. Maria had become a master musician without any of the usual privileges or opportunities. She had done it through pure love of music and determination. The violin in Maria's hands no longer looked cheap or old. Under the rehearsal room lights, as she played with such skill and passion, it looked like it was made of gold. The scratches and scuffs that had seemed so obvious before were now invisible. All that mattered was the incredible music flowing from its strings. Sarah Chen realized she was crying. Tears were running down her cheeks, but she did not wipe them away. She did not want to make any movement that might disturb the spell Maria was creating. This music was touching something deep inside her that had been buried under years of technical training and professional pressure. The melody began to build toward what felt like a climax. All the different themes Maria had introduced earlier were coming together now. The lullabies, the church hymns, the sound of her mother's sewing machine, the laughter of children, the prayers of old people. Everything was weaving together into one magnificent musical tapestry. Tom Rodriguez understood that he was hearing something he would remember for the rest of his life. This was the kind of moment that reminded him why he had become a music teacher. This was what music was supposed to be about. Not competitions or grades or auditions, but pure human expression. Maria played on, completely absorbed in her music, not knowing that she had already changed everything in that room forever. As Maria played deeper into her improvised composition, each phrase of music began to tell the story of her life. She did not plan this. The memories simply flowed through her fingers and became sound. The judges listening could not know the specific details of what they were hearing, but they could feel the truth and emotion in every note. The melody shifted now to something that sounded like a child's song. Maria was remembering her earliest years in a small village in Mexico. She had been 5 years old, sitting on her grandmother's lap in a wooden chair outside their adobe house. Her grandmother, Esperanza, would sing while she braided Maria's hair. The songs were old, passed down through generations of women in their family. They were about love and loss, about hope and hardship, about the strength it takes to keep going when life becomes difficult. Esperanza's voice had been rough, from years of hard work, but it was also warm and full of love. She would sing about birds that carried messages between lovers separated by mountains. She would sing about flowers that bloomed in the desert after rare rainstorms. She would sing about children who grew up to do great things their parents could never imagine. As Maria played these memories, her violin captured not just the melodies but the feeling of being safe and loved in her grandmother's arms. The music evolved again, and now it told the story of leaving. Maria was 8 years old when her parents decided to come to America. Roberto, her father, had heard there were construction jobs in the north where a man could earn enough money to send his children to school. Elena, her mother, was pregnant with Maria's little brother. They needed better opportunities, better health care, a better future. Maria's violin sang the sadness of goodbye. The night before they left, the whole extended family had gathered in her grandmother's small house. There had been tears and promises to write letters. There had been prayers for safe travels and successful new lives. Esperanza had given Maria a small wooden cross that had belonged to her own mother. "Keep this close to your heart," she had whispered, "and remember that you carry all of our love with you." The melody became more complex as it told the story of the journey north. Roberto had saved money for 2 years to pay for the trip. They rode in old buses that broke down frequently. They walked for miles in the desert heat. Elena, heavy with pregnancy, never complained. She would sing quietly to keep Maria and herself calm during the most difficult moments. Those songs found their way into Maria's violin now, carrying with them the memory of her mother's courage. Dr. Wolf listened to this part of the musical story and felt something stir in his own heart. His family had also immigrated to America, though that had been 3 generations ago. His great-grandfather had come from Germany with nothing but a violin and a dream of playing in American orchestras. Dr. Wolf had grown up hearing stories about those early struggles, about the sacrifices made so that future generations could have better lives. The music shifted again, and now it spoke of arriving in a new country. Maria was remembering their first apartment in America. It was smaller than her grandmother's house. The walls were thin, and they could hear their neighbors arguing at night. But it was theirs. Roberto had found work on a construction crew. Elena had found a job cleaning office buildings at night. They worked hard and saved every penny they could. Maria played the sounds of her new neighborhood. There were sirens at all hours. There were children speaking in languages she did not understand. There were music systems playing songs from a dozen different countries. It was overwhelming and exciting at the same time. Her violin captured the feeling of being lost but also hopeful, of being afraid but also brave. Sarah Chen found herself thinking about her own family's story. Her grandparents had come from China with nothing. They had worked in restaurants and laundries, saving money so their children could go to college. Sarah's parents had sacrificed to pay for her violin lessons, even when money was tight. The music Maria was playing reminded her of stories her grandmother had told about missing family left behind, about working jobs that hurt your back and your spirit just so your children could have chances you never had. The melody became more joyful. Now as Maria played the memory of her brother's birth, Carlos had been born 6 months after they arrived in America. He was their first real American, though Elena always insisted that America was lucky to have him, not the other way around. Maria remembered holding her tiny brother for the first time. He had looked at her with dark, serious eyes, as if he already understood the responsibility they all shared to make their parents' sacrifices worthwhile. Roberto had been so proud of his American son. He would carry Carlos everywhere, showing him off to the other men on his construction crew. "This boy will be a doctor," he would say, "or maybe a lawyer. He will wear a suit to work instead of these dirty clothes." Maria played this pride and hope in soaring passages that made her violin sing like it was celebrating. But the music also told harder stories. Maria played the sound of her father coughing at night. Roberto had developed lung problems from years of construction work. The dust and chemicals had damaged his breathing. He tried to hide it from his family, but Maria could hear him struggling in the next room. Elena would make him tea with honey and sit beside his bed until the coughing stopped. Tom. Rodriguez listened to this part of the story and felt tears in his eyes. He had watched too many of his students' families struggle with similar problems. Hard-working parents who sacrificed their health for their children's futures. Mothers and fathers who never complained about their own pain because they were too busy making sure their kids had what they needed to succeed. The violin sang the memory of family dinners around their small kitchen table. Elena would cook traditional Mexican foods that reminded them of home. Roberto would tell stories about his work, always focusing on the funny things that had happened rather than the difficulties. Carlos would babble in his high chair, mixing Spanish and English words in ways that made everyone laugh. These were precious moments of happiness in lives that required enormous strength just to get through each day. Maria played the sound of Sunday mornings at their local church. The congregation was made up mostly of other immigrant families. They came from many different countries, but they shared the experience of starting over in a new place. The hymns they sang together were in Spanish and English and sometimes other languages. But the music united them all. It reminded them that they were not alone in their struggles. The melody grew sadder as Maria remembered her father's illness getting worse. Roberto had ignored his symptoms for too long, afraid that taking time off work would mean they could not pay their rent. By the time he finally went to see a doctor, the damage to his lungs was serious. The treatments were expensive and their insurance did not cover everything they needed. Maria played the memory of nights when her parents thought she was asleep, but she could hear them talking quietly in the kitchen. They spoke about medical bills and whether Roberto would be able to keep working. Elena took on extra cleaning jobs to help pay for his medicine. Sometimes Maria would find her mother asleep at the kitchen table, still wearing her work uniform, too tired to make it to bed. Through it all, her parents had insisted that Maria and Carlos continue with school. Education is the only thing they cannot take away from you, Elena would say. Study hard, and you will have choices we never had. So Maria had studied hard, and in her free time she had dreamed of making music that would somehow honor the sacrifices her family had made for her. When Maria finally lowered her violin and bowed to her sides, the rehearsal room fell into complete silence. It was not the awkward silence of an audience unsure how to respond. It was the deep, respectful silence that follows something truly extraordinary. The three judges sat motionless in their chairs, still processing what they had just experienced. Dr. Wolf stared at Maria with wide eyes. In his 30 years as a conductor, he had worked with members of the Berlin Philharmonic, the New York Symphony, and the London Orchestra. He had conducted world premieres of works by famous composers. He had shared stages with musicians whose names appeared on concert halls around the world. But he had never heard anything quite like what had just happened in this small rehearsal room. The piece Maria had played was not written in any music book. It had come directly from her heart and her memories, but it was not amateur improvisation. It was sophisticated composition happening in real time. The melodies were complex and beautiful. The harmonies, even though played on a single instrument, were rich and full. The emotional depth was something that could not be taught in any music school. Sarah Chen felt like she was waking up from a dream. She looked at Maria standing in the center of the room, holding her scratched violin, and tried to understand how such incredible music had come from someone she had never heard of before. Sarah had studied at prestigious music schools. She had learned from teachers who charged hundreds of dollars per lesson. But this woman, who worked as a hospital cleaner, had just displayed a level of musical understanding that Sarah was not sure she possessed herself. Tom Rodriguez realized his hands were shaking slightly. As a music teacher, he thought he understood what talent looked like. He had seen students with natural ability. He had seen students who worked hard to overcome their limitations. But he had never seen anything like what Maria had just demonstrated. This was not just talent. This was genius in its purest form. The silence stretched on for nearly a minute. Maria began to feel nervous again. She wondered if she had made a mistake by not playing the simple scale they had asked for. Maybe the judges were angry with her for changing the audition. Maybe they thought she was showing off or being disrespectful. She started to apologize. "I am sorry," she began quietly. "I know you wanted me to play the scale. I should have—" "Stop," Dr. Wolf said, holding up his hand. His voice was softer than it had been all day. "Do not apologize." He stood up from his chair slowly, as if he was still in shock. "What was that piece you just played?" Maria looked confused. "What piece?" "The music you just performed. What is it called? Who composed it?" Maria hesitated. "I do not know what to call it. It is just something I play sometimes when I practice at home." Dr. Wolf walked closer to Maria. "You mean you composed that yourself?" "I suppose so," Maria said. "I never wrote it down. It just comes out when I play." Sarah Chen stood up from her chair. "Maria, how long have you been playing violin?" "About 3 years," Maria answered, "since I bought this violin from a pawn shop." 3 years? Tom Rodriguez could not hide his amazement. "You have only been playing for 3 years?" Maria nodded. "I wanted to learn when I was younger, but we could not afford lessons. So I taught myself using videos on the internet and books from the library." Dr. Wolf felt his heart racing. This was impossible. What he had just heard required not just years of study, but decades of musical development. The technical skills alone should have taken 10 years to master. The musicality and emotional expression suggested someone who had been performing professionally for most of their life. "Do you have any formal musical training at all?" Sarah Chen asked. "No," Maria said. "Just what I could learn on my own." The 3 judges looked at each other. They were all thinking the same thing, but none of them wanted to say it out loud. They had just discovered something extraordinary. This was not just a good musician who could fill a chair in their community orchestra. This was someone who could change the entire musical landscape of their city. Dr. Wolf began to pace around the room. His mind was racing with possibilities. "Maria, do you have other compositions like the one you just played?" "I have music in my head," Maria said carefully. "Different pieces for different moods, but I have never written any of them down." "How many pieces would you say you have composed?" Maria thought about this. "Maybe 20 or 30 complete pieces, and many shorter melodies." Tom Rodriguez sat back down heavily in his chair. This woman had composed 30 pieces of music and never written any of them down. She carried an entire repertoire in her memory, and if what they had just heard was any indication, these compositions were of professional quality. "Maria," Dr. Wolf said, his voice becoming more excited, "I need to ask you something very important. Are you interested in more than just playing third chair in our community orchestra?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, would you be interested in performing as a soloist, playing your own compositions for larger audiences?" Maria looked surprised. "I do not understand. I just came here to audition for a seat in the back of the orchestra." Sarah Chen stepped forward. "What Dr. Wolf is trying to say is that you have a gift that goes far beyond what we were expecting today. The music you just played is not the kind of music we usually hear in auditions. It is the kind of music that concert halls are built for." "But I work at the hospital," Maria said. "I clean floors. I am not a real musician." "You are more of a real musician than most of the people who have degrees from fancy music schools," Tom Rodriguez said. "What you just did cannot be taught. You have something that comes along maybe once in a generation." Dr. Wolf stopped pacing and looked directly at Maria. "I want to make you an offer, not for third chair violin. I want to offer you the position of featured soloist for our upcoming charity gala concert. It is our biggest event of the year. The concert hall holds 1,200 people, and it is always sold out." Maria felt dizzy. "I cannot play for 1,200 people. I have never performed for anyone except my mother and sometimes my neighbor." "The piece you just played," Sarah Chen said gently, "that would be perfect for the gala. People would be amazed to hear something so beautiful." "But my violin," Maria said, looking down at the scratched instrument in her hands. "It is not good enough for a real concert. Dr. Wolf smiled for the first time all day. We will take care of that. I know someone who loans instruments to promising musicians. We can get you a violin that is worthy of your talent. And lessons, Tom Rodriguez added, not because you need to learn how to play, but because there are things about performing for large audiences that might be helpful to know. Maria felt overwhelmed. When she had woken up this morning, her biggest hope was to earn a seat in the back of a small community orchestra. Now these important musicians were talking about solo concerts and professional instruments. It seemed too good to be true. I do not know, she said quietly. This is very different from what I expected. Dr. Wolf walked over to Maria and looked into her eyes. Maria, in my entire career I have heard maybe 5 or 6 musicians who had that special something that separates good players from great ones. You have it. You have it in abundance. It would be a crime against music itself if we did not help you share this gift with the world. Sarah Chen nodded in agreement. What you played today moved all of us to tears. Imagine what it could do for an audience of people who have never heard anything like it. Maria looked at the 3 judges who had been so uninterested in her just 30 minutes ago. Now they were looking at her like she was the most important person in the room. She thought about her father, who had always believed she could do great things. She thought about her mother, who worked so hard to support Maria's dreams. Maybe this was why all of their sacrifices had been worth it. 2 days after the audition, Maria was still trying to believe what had happened. She sat in her small apartment holding the business card Dr. Wolf had given her. It was thick, expensive paper with gold letters that spelled out Heinrich Wolf, musical director, City Symphony Orchestra. On the back, he had written his personal cell phone number and the words, "Call me tomorrow, H.W." Maria had called the next day, half expecting Dr. Wolf to have changed his mind. Maybe he had decided that a hospital cleaner could never really perform in a professional concert. Maybe he had realized it was all a mistake. But when he answered the phone, his voice was full of excitement and energy. "Maria, I am so glad you called. I have been making arrangements for you all morning." Arrangements? "First, I have scheduled you to meet with Patricia Williams tomorrow afternoon. She is the best violin teacher in the city. She has agreed to work with you to prepare for the gala performance." Maria felt nervous. "Dr. Wolf, I cannot afford expensive lessons." "Do not worry about money," he said quickly. "Patricia is doing this because she wants to. After I told her about your audition, she said she would be honored to work with someone of your talent. She is not charging anything." Maria could hardly believe it. She had never had a real violin teacher before. She had dreamed about it for years, but private lessons cost more money than her family could spare. Now one of the best teachers in the city wanted to work with her for free. "There is more," Dr. Wolf continued. "I have also arranged for you to borrow a professional violin for the performance. My friend Richard owns a music store downtown. He has a violin that was made in Italy in 1890. It is worth more than most people's cars. He wants to loan it to you." Maria felt overwhelmed again. "Why would he do that? He does not even know me." "Because word is already getting around about what happened at your audition. Sarah Chen called 2 of her friends and told them about you. Tom Rodriguez told his wife, who told her sister, who works at the newspaper. People in the music community are excited about you, Maria. They want to help." That afternoon, Maria walked into Patricia Williams' music studio. It was in a beautiful old building downtown, with high ceilings and tall windows. The walls were covered with pictures of Patricia with famous musicians. There were certificates and awards everywhere. Maria felt very small in such an impressive place. Patricia was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and kind eyes. She wore an elegant black dress and pearl earrings. When Maria walked in carrying her old violin case, Patricia smiled warmly. "You must be Maria," she said. "Dr. Wolf has told me wonderful things about you." "I am nervous," Maria admitted. "I have never had a real teacher before." "Do not be nervous," Patricia said gently. "I am not here to change how you play. What you do naturally is remarkable. I'm here to help you feel confident performing for a large audience." They spent the first hour just talking. Patricia asked about Maria's life, her family, how she had learned to play violin. She listened carefully to every answer. She did not seem surprised or impressed by Maria's unusual background. She treated Maria like any other serious musician. "Now," Patricia said, "would you play something for me? Whatever you feel comfortable with." Maria took out her old violin. In this beautiful studio, it looked even more worn and cheap than usual. But when she began to play, Patricia's expression changed immediately. Maria played a shorter version of the piece she had performed at the audition. As the music filled the room, Patricia closed her eyes and listened with complete attention. When Maria finished, Patricia was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Maria, I have been teaching violin for 40 years. I have worked with students who went on to play in major orchestras around the world, but I have never heard anyone play with the natural musicality you have. It is a gift from God." Over the next few weeks, Maria met with Patricia twice a week. They worked on stage presence, on breathing techniques for performing, on how to connect with an audience. Patricia never tried to change Maria's unique style of playing. Instead, she helped Maria understand how to project her music to fill a large concert hall. "Your technique is already excellent," Patricia explained during one lesson. "You have taught yourself things that some of my students never master. What we need to work on is confidence. When you play for 1,200 people, you need to believe that your music deserves to be heard by every single one of them." Meanwhile, Dr. Wolf was busy promoting the concert. He had decided to call it an evening of discovery and to feature Maria as the main attraction. He wrote a press release about finding an undiscovered musical genius working as a hospital cleaner. The story was picked up by the local newspaper, then by a regional magazine, then by a classical music blog that had readers across the country. Maria was amazed by the attention. The newspaper sent a photographer to take pictures of her at the hospital where she worked. Her supervisor, Mrs. Johnson, was proud and supportive. "I always knew there was something special about you," she said. "The way you hum while you work, it always sounded beautiful to me." 3 weeks before the concert, Maria met Richard at his music store to see the violin she would borrow for the performance. Richard was a tall, thin man with a beard. His store was filled with instruments that gleamed under the bright lights. When he brought out the Italian violin, Maria gasped. It was the most beautiful instrument she had ever seen. The wood was a deep, rich brown color that seemed to glow. The varnish was so perfect it looked like liquid gold. When Richard placed it in Maria's hands, it felt different from her old violin. It was lighter but somehow more substantial at the same time. This violin was made by a craftsman named Giuseppe Carboni in 1890, Richard explained. He was not as famous as Stradivarius, but his instruments are known for their incredible tone. This violin has been played by several professional musicians over the years, but it has been waiting for someone who could really make it sing. When Maria drew the bow across the strings for the first time, the sound that came out was breathtaking. It was her old violin multiplied by 10. Every note was crystal clear and rich. The instrument seemed to respond to her slightest touch. She played a simple scale and it sounded like a symphony. "How much is this violin worth?" Maria asked, afraid to know the answer. "About $60,000, Richard said casually. Maria nearly dropped the instrument. "I cannot borrow something this expensive. What if I damage it?" "You will not damage it," Richard said firmly. "This violin was made to be played, not to sit in a case. Besides, after what Dr. Wolf told me about your playing, I know you will take better care of it than some people take care of their children." As the concert date approached, Maria continued working at the hospital. She did not want to quit her job until she was sure the music could support her. But her co-workers had all heard about the upcoming performance. They were planning to buy tickets to hear her play. "We are all so proud of you," said Janet, another cleaner who had become Maria's friend. "But we are not surprised. We always knew you had something special. The way you would hum while you worked, it made even the hardest days feel a little lighter." Elena, Maria's mother, was more excited than anyone. She had taken extra shifts to earn money for a new dress to wear to the concert. "I want to look nice when I watch my daughter become a star," she said. She called everyone she knew to tell them about Maria's performance. Carlos, Maria's brother, was now 16 and doing well in school. He had started learning guitar after being inspired by his sister's musical journey. "You showed me that music is not just for rich people," he told Maria. "You showed me that if you want something enough, you can make it happen." A week before the concert, the local television station asked to interview Maria. She was nervous about being on TV, but Patricia encouraged her to do it. "People want to know your story," Patricia said. "Your music is beautiful, but your journey makes it even more meaningful." During the TV interview, Maria talked about her family, her job at the hospital, and how she had taught herself to play violin. The interviewer asked her what she hoped people would feel when they heard her music. "I hope they will understand that music is not about having expensive instruments or fancy training," Maria said. "Music is about sharing what is in your heart. Everyone has something beautiful inside them. Sometimes we just need courage to let it out." The day before the concert, Dr. Wolf called Maria with news that both excited and terrified her. "Maria," he said, "the concert is completely sold out. We have a waiting list of 300 people hoping for last-minute tickets. There are people driving from other cities to hear you play." "What if I disappoint them?" Maria asked. "You could not disappoint them if you tried," Dr. Wolf said. "Just play from your heart, like you did in that rehearsal room. That is all anyone could ask for." That night, Maria sat in her apartment with the beautiful borrowed violin. She played quietly, not wanting to disturb her neighbors too much, but she played her heart out, preparing for the most important performance of her life. The day of the concert arrived with bright autumn sunshine. Maria woke up early in her small apartment, feeling nervous but also excited. She had not slept well, but it was not because she was worried about forgetting her music. The pieces she planned to play lived so deeply in her memory that she could perform them even in her dreams. She was nervous about something bigger, about whether she belonged on the same stage where famous musicians had performed for decades. Elena had come over early to help Maria get ready. She brought a simple but elegant black dress that she had saved money to buy for this special day. "You look like a real concert musician," Elena said with tears in her eyes as she helped Maria with her hair. "Your father would be so proud." Carlos arrived with a bouquet of flowers he had bought with money from his part-time job at a grocery store. "These are for after your concert," he said, trying to sound grown-up and mature. But Maria could see that he was just as nervous and excited as she was. By afternoon, Maria was at the concert hall for her final rehearsal. The Steinway Concert Hall looked different when it was empty. The 1,200 red velvet seats stretched up to the high ceiling like a sea of expectation. The stage was much larger than the small rehearsal room where she had first played for Dr. Wolf. A single chair and music stand waited in the center of the stage under bright spotlights. Patricia Williams was there to help Maria practice with the acoustics of the big hall. "Remember," Patricia said gently, "this room wants to help you. The acoustics are designed to make music sound its best. Trust the space and trust yourself." Maria took her place on the stage and lifted the beautiful Italian violin. When she played her first notes, she was amazed by how the sound filled the enormous space. The music seemed to grow and expand, reaching every corner of the hall. She could imagine how it would feel when all those seats were filled with people. Dr. Wolf watched from the back of the hall during the rehearsal. He had been conducting orchestras for 30 years, but he still got chills listening to Maria play. Her music had a quality that could not be taught in any school. It came from life experience, from love and loss and hope. It came from a place of authentic human emotion that many professional musicians spent their whole careers trying to find. As evening approached, people began arriving at the concert hall. The local newspaper had run several articles about Maria's story in the weeks leading up to the performance. Word had spread through social media and classical music blogs. Many people were curious about this mysterious hospital cleaner who had been discovered by accident during a routine audition. Elena and Carlos arrived early, dressed in their finest clothes. Elena wore a navy blue dress and the pearl necklace that had belonged to her mother. Carlos wore a suit he had borrowed from a friend. They found their seats in the fourth row, close enough to see Maria clearly, but far enough back to take in the whole stage. Mrs. Johnson, Maria's supervisor from the hospital, was there with several of her colleagues. They had pooled their money to buy a group of tickets together. "We have been listening to Maria hum while she works for 3 years," Mrs. Johnson told the other concert-goers around them. "We always knew she had something special." Richard, the violin shop owner, sat in the front row with his wife. The Italian violin that Maria would play tonight had been in his shop for 5 years, waiting for someone who could truly make it sing. He had loaned instruments to many musicians over the years, but he had never been as excited to hear one of his violins as he was tonight. Patricia Williams took her seat near the side of the hall where she could see Maria's face during the performance. She had worked with hundreds of students over 4 decades of teaching, but she had never felt as proud as she did tonight. Maria had grown so much in just a few weeks, not in her musical ability, which had been extraordinary from the beginning, but in her confidence and stage presence. As the hall filled with people, Maria waited backstage in a small dressing room. She could hear the buzz of conversation from the audience. She could hear people finding their seats and talking excitedly about what they were about to hear. The sound made her stomach flutter with nervousness. Dr. Wolf knocked on her dressing room door. "It is time," he said softly. Maria stood up and picked up the violin case. Inside was the beautiful Italian instrument that had been made by hand more than a century ago. She thought about all the musicians who had played this violin before her. She thought about Giuseppe Carboni, the craftsman who had shaped its wood and varnish with such care. She hoped she was worthy of continuing its musical story. "Are you ready?" Dr. Wolf asked. "I think so," Maria said. "I am still nervous." "Good," he said. "If you were not nervous, it would mean this performance was not important to you. The nervousness will disappear as soon as you start playing." They walked together toward the stage. Maria could hear Dr. Wolf's footsteps on the wood floor, but her own feet seemed to make no sound. She felt like she was floating. Everything seemed very bright and very quiet at the same time. Dr. Wolf stepped onto the stage first to introduce Maria to the audience. The conversations in the hall died down as people realized the concert was about to begin. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Wolf said into the microphone, "tonight you will hear something very special. 3 months ago, a young woman came to audition for third-chair violin in our community orchestra. She was asked to play a simple scale. Instead, she played something that changed all of our lives. Maria Santos has never performed for a large audience before tonight. She has never had formal musical training. But she has something that cannot be taught, a direct connection between her heart and her music. Please welcome Maria Santos." The audience applauded as Maria walked onto the stage. She wore the elegant black dress Elena had bought for her. Her hair was pulled back simply, and she wore small pearl earrings that had belonged to her grandmother. She looked nervous but also determined. She carried herself with a dignity that came from knowing she had earned her place on this stage. Maria took her position in the center of the stage. She could see hundreds of faces looking at her from the red velvet seats. She could see Elena and Carlos in the 4th row, both beaming with pride. She could see her co-workers from the hospital, Patricia Williams, Richard from the violin shop, and many other people who had become part of her musical journey. She lifted the Italian violin and placed it under her chin. The instrument felt familiar now, like an extension of her own body. She raised her bow and looked out at the audience one more time. Then she closed her eyes and began to play. The first note that came from her violin was pure and clear and beautiful. It floated through the concert hall like a bird taking flight. The audience fell completely silent. Even the small sounds of people shifting in their seats disappeared. There was only Maria's music filling the space. She began with a gentle, flowing melody that seemed to speak directly to every person in the hall. The music told the story of a little girl learning lullabies from her grandmother. It told about the sadness of leaving home and the hope of finding new dreams. It spoke about hard work and sacrifice and the love that makes difficult times bearable. As Maria continued to play, the music grew more complex and powerful. She moved through different themes and emotions, taking the audience on a journey through her life and her imagination. Sometimes the violin sang with joy like children playing in sunshine. Sometimes it whispered with tenderness, like a mother comforting a crying child. Sometimes it soared with triumph, like someone overcoming impossible obstacles. The Italian violin responded to every touch of Maria's fingers and every stroke of her bow. Under the concert hall lights, the instrument seemed to glow with its own inner fire. The sound that came from it was richer and more beautiful than anything most of the audience had ever heard. People in the audience found themselves holding their breath during the quiet passages and feeling their hearts race during the exciting ones. Some people had tears streaming down their faces without realizing it. Others sat with their mouths slightly open, amazed by what they were hearing. This was not just a concert. This was a shared experience of pure human emotion expressed through music. Maria played for nearly 45 minutes without stopping. The pieces flowed into each other naturally, like chapters in a book or movements in a symphony. She played music about love and loss, about hope and struggle, about the beauty that can be found in the simplest moments of life. She played music that could only have come from someone who had lived fully and loved deeply. When Maria finally lowered her violin and bow, the concert hall was completely silent for several long seconds. The audience seemed to be waking up from a beautiful dream. Then someone started clapping and the applause spread through the hall like wildfire. People rose to their feet, first one by one, then in groups, then all at once. The standing ovation lasted for more than 10 minutes. People clapped until their hands hurt. They called out, "Bravo" and "beautiful" and more. Some people were still crying. Others were smiling so widely their faces hurt. Everyone understood that they had just witnessed something extraordinary. Maria stood on the stage, overwhelmed by the response. She had never imagined that her simple music could affect so many people so deeply.